Hi there, this is Deborah Arca with the Pathos Book Club, and this month we are featuring a brand new book called Heaven on Earth, Realizing the Good Life Now. And this book is co-authored by Chris Seidman and Joshua Graves, and Josh Graves is here with me on Skype today. Hi, Josh.
How you doing?
I'm well, thanks. And Josh, you are where again in this country?
I live in Nashville,
Nashville,
Tennessee.
that's
We
right.
call it Music City.
Music City.
Yeah.
Love it. Well, we've been talking a little bit about the book here these last few minutes and talking about what a kind of beautiful meditation this book is on heaven, specifically where heaven is and how heaven is understood to us as Christians, as well as a wonderful meditation on the Beatitudes and how the Beatitudes really embody Jesus's breaking in with the kingdom of heaven on earth. So tell us just a little bit first, Heaven on Earth as your title. That's kind of an interesting little switch from us thinking about heaven not on earth. So what do you mean by
Right.
heaven on earth?
We get asked this question a lot, and honestly, it shows you that Abingdon's smarter than we are because we thought people would want to talk more about the book, but we've been asked more about the title. But essentially, the book is built on the question you're asking. So you're asking about the foundation. We don't talk a ton about heaven. We don't debate about it a lot, but you're asking kind of the foundational question. And that is, if you look at the New York Times bestseller list, there's been a lot of stuff written on heaven lately,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of different opinions. And this transcends religious identity, by the way. This is not just a Christian conversation.
Right.
You know, 9/11 was about heaven in some ways.
Yeah.
So this is a world conversation right now. What we're suggesting is that Jesus had a very Jewish belief of heaven, that heaven was a realm or a dimension in which all of God's activity, his longing, his dreams for the world were true. And that Jesus steps into the present day, which is Advent, that's the celebration, to show the world's future. To say, this is where the world's going, you can get on board now, you can wait 20 years, you can wait 1,000 years, but this is where the world's going to end up. And that's obviously a statement of faith. I can't prove that. But that kind of takes faith to make that leap and believe that. So when we use the title Heaven on Earth, that comes directly from Jesus' prayer in Matthew 6, which is very much, I think, the center of who Jesus was as a teacher, as a prophet, as a rabbi. When he taught his disciples to pray, he said, make sure when you pray that you pray things would happen on earth as they are in heaven. So Jesus didn't live with these categories of physical, spiritual, good, bad. He believed it was all a part of what God was doing in the world, that you have to embrace the paradox of life. So when he says heaven on earth, I think he believes that the way God is working is tangible, accessible, available, and can be experienced right now in Denver or in Nashville or in Dubai or in Paris, that there's no center to go to. The center's everywhere. God is involved in all things. And I think that's what the Sermon on the Mount kind of teases out. Even though it's very practical, it starts at the beginning with this huge vision of what human communities can do. If they take the God that Jesus represents, if they take him seriously, then it has these really interesting, creative, kind of practical implications. So that's what we were getting after with the book. We don't pretend to be experts on heaven. I'm
Yeah.
still pretty sure U2 will be the opening act. I can't prove that.
That's awesome.
Though some would say it's going to be Mumford now, since they're
That's
the
right.
hottest band in the world. But,
Mumford's going to be in the running now. Well,
they're
just
pretty
just
good.
as a side note, before we get back to
Yeah.
the Beatitudes, so how did we get as a Christian faith so far away from that understanding of heaven and get to this kind of understanding of heaven as this place up in the sky with angels
Yeah.
and harp players and the pearly gates and all of that? Where did that come from?
This is a great question. Some of the best thinkers in the world right now, like N.T. Wright and other great New Testament scholars, have written a ton on this, so people can tease this out more in other writings if they want to. But as you see Christianity move from Jerusalem and spread westward through Europe and London and now to the West, or to the United States. You see this happen in all different streams, but what's happening is there's this battle kind of between Jewish views of the world and Greek views of the world. And the Greek view of the world, this is a very complicated conversation, but just to kind of say it very quickly in a way that people won't be bored to tears with, there is a stream in Greek philosophy back to Plato that is fundamentally suspicious of the physical world. As opposed to Genesis, which says that the world was created good. Genesis says that multiple times, the world is good, the world is good. And it says that humans were created in the image of God, that humans are very good. So there's been this battle in Western history and philosophy between kind of this Greek notion that the physical world is bad and the soul is good, and the Jewish world, which says you can't separate those two. Humans are divine and dust. We are angels and animals, and you can't separate that two. And C.S. Lewis was really one of the first ones who started to make this popular in the 50s and the 60s, and he should get royalties for some of the money that other authors are making off him now. But he really did a good job, like Screwtape Letters and some other writings, of showing how the physical world is caught up in what God is doing, that you cannot separate them out. If you think of the world like a stage, there's this curtain that runs through the middle, and you have front stage and back stage, and the front stage is the physical world, the back stage is the spiritual world, but you still have to have both. Like, they're still interconnected. So in America, we've kind of grown addicted to these notions of eternity as a lack of physicalness, a physical world. And the central claim of Christianity is that God raised Jesus from the dead. And when he was raised from the dead, he had a body. In fact, he had a body that still had the scars of his crucifixion. So some have suggested that the resurrection itself is the end of the divide that we have between the sacred and the profane, and the temporary and the eternal. So what's really happening now is that we are returning back to a more Jewish notion of heaven, a more Jewish notion of the body, a more Jewish notion of God's purposes in the world. And again, there's still a ton of mystery in all that. There's still a ton of ambiguity, and we don't know everything. But this notion of having a harp on a cloud, you can trace that all the way through Greek philosophy, in the way in which that gets kind of it explodes in American culture, so that you can kind of make heaven whatever you want it to be.
Right. Whatever you need it to be.
And in Christian circles, it's ended up being an eternal church service, which to me sounds a lot more like hell than it does heaven. But that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, and that makes me think that this really is an important recasting of our understanding of heaven, because so many people today, so many younger people, I think, are just kind of turned off to this vision of everything good being kind of when we die, and so I wonder if this book is going to help in getting people excited again about what it really means to follow Jesus and to be a Christian. That it's about right now, right here. Yeah,
that's a great point.
Yeah,
Nietzsche's biggest critique of Christianity was its otherworldliness,
right.
And I think he was right in that he saw so many Christians who were so intrigued by this idea of the afterlife that it didn't really translate for them into what was happening in this world. And the irony is, whether you're a Christian or not, I think you have to admit intellectually that no one has impacted human history more than Jesus of Nazareth. Whether you believe he was divine or, whatever you think about all that is a different discussion, but no one has impacted whole societies and nations and religions. If you look at Islam, Jesus has huge influence. So, I think if you take seriously the notion that Jesus did so much to change this world, any view of heaven that has very little to do with this world should automatically be called in question, because its founder lived in a way that challenged that kind of American notion, if that makes sense.
Right, yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about the Beatitudes a little bit, because you say that the Beatitudes, rather than being prescriptive, which again is another kind of way helping us understand the Beatitudes in a different way than might be traditional. Not prescriptive, so not to say that I have to become poor to enter the kingdom of heaven or possess the kingdom of heaven, but you're saying the Beatitudes actually are Jesus's declaration of how the kingdom of heaven is here with us now. So say a little bit more about that, your understanding of the Beatitudes, kind of in this different way than many of us might understand it as a prescription for getting into heaven.
Okay. If you start reading the Bible in Genesis 3, you get a totally different reading of God than you do if you start reading the Bible in Genesis 1. What I mean by that is, if you start reading the Bible in Genesis 3, then you go on this mission to figure out how do you take care of the problem of sin and evil in the world. If you start reading the story from Genesis 1, you see how God is always trying to restore the world back to its good, perfect, shalom state. And of course, sin isn't in the way and a part of that, but the goal of God and humanity is not just to get rid of sin or evil. The goal of God and humanity is to get humanity and creation back in a relationship with God. And let me give you two clear pictures of what I mean by this. In the Beatitudes, you can read it in one of two ways. You can read it, as you said, as a prescription, like a doctor filling out the prescription form saying, this is your sickness, these are the symptoms, I see this, so I'm diagnosing you, do this and you will get this result, which is how we typically read that because we think of God as a judge and we want to please the judge, to add a metaphor to that. But there's another way to read it. My wife loves to get letters in the mail, particularly invitations to parties. She just loves it. We got one last night from a friend who's a college president, and it was like this huge box, and she could not wait to open it, right? And I think that's what the Beatitudes become in the life of the church. Is it isn't the doctor saying, do this, do this, do this, do this. Oh, and if you don't see this happening in your life, it's because you're not trying hard enough. Because God knows a lot of us try pretty hard. It's not like we've just given up on this. But rather, it's Jesus offering an invitation, saying, "Why not this dance, this party is happening in the world? Like there are poor and broken people, people who are hurting, and all these different taglines, all these different descriptions that you get in the Beatitudes. Jesus has sent an invitation to say, come and see if you think that God might be at work in the world in places you would not expect, among people who are brokering peace in situations of violence." Among those who have been crushed by the weight of oppression or martyrdom or being poor in spirit. So it's more of an invitation not to try and do all of them at every time in your life, but to say, maybe I'll explore this part of what it means to be a peacemaker, or maybe I'll explore what he means by righteousness and what's happening in the world. So rather than do this, it's an invitation to see if it's true. If this is what God is doing in people's lives. And I think that's the difference between trying to convince someone intellectually in their head, which is what we love to do in American Christianity. We debate and argue doctrine all day long. Or if it's an invitation to just a different way of seeing the world. And then you can respond with your heart whether you think that's what God is doing. But those are two different visions. And I think part of it is when you're 10, I have a 3-year-old. When you're 3, you need your parent to say, Lucas, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to do. Until he's old enough to trust me and be able to make his own decisions, right? But I think as you grow in faith, I think there comes a point where you realize that Jesus was not trying to heap a bunch of more expectations, but rather to say, always keep in mind, the world is a huge place. And no matter where you've gone or how lost you get, you can always find your way home. And here's the invitation to the way home back to the heart of the Father. So it's always good news. It's always an invitation. It's always that music kind of playing in the background to say there's a party happening.
What a beautiful invitation, and what a great Christmas gift.
Yeah,
this book,
exactly.
This book is going to make a great Christmas gift, great for a stocking stuffer. What a wonderful way to welcome Christmas and to walk into the new year with a little guidebook that's really more of an invitation to find your way home, find your way to heaven here on this earth. So thank you so much, Josh, for your time today. And I hope everybody goes to the Patheos Book Club and takes a closer look at the book. We have an excerpt there, we have some videos there, and we have a lot of bloggers talking about what this book has meant to them. So thanks so much, Josh. Take care.
Thank you, Deborah.